Actually, before we start, let me introduce you to my friend John.
Hey there, my name is John and I have 3 kids and a wife. Earlier today, I went to the grocery store to get some bananas, orange juice, and frozen fruit because I plan to make smoothies for my family later this week.
Cool, John. Now, you may be a little bit confused about the strange interaction you just had to witness, so let me explain. From John's short story, we've learned a few things about him. First, that he's a family man with 3 kids and a wife, that he went grocery shopping today, that his family enjoys smoothies, and he seems like a friendly, non-threatening person. Now, this simple interaction shows how effortlessly our brain extracts meaning from language. It's not just about understanding words, it's about interpreting context, relationship, and categories of information. Language is how humans communicate, and I think we all understand that communicating is an essential part of human existence. Now, have you ever wondered how our brains actually understand language? Well, while we know the cerebral cortex plays a role in processing language, the full layout of this semantic system, which is the system representing the regions of the brain involved in meaning making, well, that system has remained unmapped. Now, let's start with the basics and what we do know. And what we know is that certain regions of the brain respond selectively to specific types of stimuli. So the brain has favorites. So these researchers who are very curious about how our brain processes semantic information managed to go do many studies and uncover distinct areas within the semantic system that selectively represent concrete or abstract words, action verbs, social narratives, and they even discovered which parts represented categories like living things, tools, food, and shelter. Now, modern researchers were pretty mad by one major limitation of all of these previous findings. That was because they only tested a narrow set of stimulus conditions. And what we mean by this is that most studies looked at only a few categories such as like living things, tools, food, or shelter, and none provided a comprehensive look at how the brain represents a wide range of semantic domains across the entire semantic system. So, to figure out semantic maps thoroughly, researchers decided to use a voxel-wide modeling of fMRI data collected while subjects listened to hours of narrative stories.
At the heart of their research lies the research question, how is the meaning of language organized and represented in the human cerebral cortex, aka the brain? Now, this was an important question, an important approach, because prior research studies had mainly focused on smaller components. They had zoomed in and looked at individual brain parts. Not many researchers have delved into the world of the greater semantic atlas. Furthermore, Huth and his colleagues didn't just focus on stringing words together and the participants just understanding the words. They also aimed to understand the greater context and how the brain deals with that. They did this through storytelling, something everyone is met with every day, thus a very natural stimulus.
Huth and his colleagues used many tasks and analysis methods throughout their study. The researchers began by creating a word embedding space, which is a map that quantifies the meaning of words. The space was built by analyzing large text datasets to determine how often each word appears with another set of 985 common words. Words with similar meaning have similar numbers, and these numbers that we would get from creating this word embedding space helped capture the relationship between words based on their context and meaning. The researchers are ultimately testing if the brain reacts the same to words with similar meaning by comparing those numbers to the brain activity. Researchers also used a regression model to predict brain activity based on the word's meaning, as represented by the numbers in the word embedding space.
Semantic Principal Component Analysis, or SPCA for short. This method helps sort through copious amounts of complex data, making it more comprehensible and easier to analyze. Think of it as a bookstore. Although there are hundreds of books, sorting them into categories makes it so much simpler to navigate, allowing you to find what you're looking for quickly and efficiently thanks to the categories. SPCA does something similar. It assumes that similar patterns of brain activity correlate to similar meanings or concept. So if, say, 2 brain areas light up simultaneously, they're likely presumably processing related concepts. But how do we get this information from the brain? That's exactly where the voxel-wise approach comes in. One tiny voxel in the brain correlates to a pixel, capturing activity in a certain region. Researchers created a detailed atlas of how the brain processes semantics by following the semantic reaction of thousands of these individual voxels. In combination with the SPCA, the voxel-wise approach reduces the complexity of the data, as well as showing the greater, broader patterns in brain activity. This allowed Huth and colleagues to also explore how all different kinds of brain areas cooperate together to apprehend language.
The authors of this study created a model called pragmatic to map the brain's semantic regions by combining 2 components. First, the arrangement model organizes functional areas across the cortex using a spring network. Imagine each functional region of the cortex as a point connected to its neighbors by a virtual spring. These springs keep regions close to their respective positions, creating a stable layout across subjects while still allowing flexibility for individual differences. Next, the emission model assigns each area a specific semantic category based on the data. It divides the cortex into regions and gives each region a label, like social, visual, or emotional, according to what activates them most.
Let's break down the experiment. 7 participants listened to over 2 hours of narrative stories while their brain activity was measured via fMRI. Each word of that story was mapped into a 985-dimensional embedding space. Researchers used a finite impulse response regression model to estimate how individual voxels in the brain responded to words. The resulting voxel-wise model weights quantified how words influenced the brain's bold response. Then, of course, to test the model, researchers used a 10-minute story that was not included in the initial training phase. The prediction accuracy of the model was evaluated by comparing the predicted brain responses to the actual fMRI data. Accurate predictions were observed in several brain regions. Then, using principal component analysis, researchers reduced the 985-dimensional word embedding space into a low-dimensional subspace while retaining essential information about voxel semantic tuning. Then, to differentiate shared semantic dimensions from noise or individual variability, they tested which dimensions explained more variance than expected by chance. This process identified 4 shared semantic dimensions, reflecting how individual voxels encode semantic information. Then the researchers projected 10,470 words from the embedding space into the 4 shared dimensions and applied k-means clustering to group the words into 12 semantic categories. Each category was hand-labeled and visualized in a shared semantic space. The categories were color-coded using RGB channels, where the first, second, and third dimension were represented by red, green, and blue respectively. This process created a vivid 4D representation of how the brain encodes and organizes meaning across different semantic categories.
Moving to the findings, this study began with an extensive voxel-wise model, which provided a high-resolution map connecting individual brain voxels with various types of language-related concepts. Then, to make sense of this massive dataset, the researchers then applied a principal component analysis. This allowed them to distill the data into 4 main semantic dimensions. These dimensions ranged from distinctions between human-centered and perceptual categories to abstract and temporal concepts. From this analysis, they identified 12 major semantic categories that the brain seems to organize naturally, such as social, visual, emotional, and more. In Figure 2a, we see the 12 categories as they align with the semantic dimensions. Each category is represented by colors, with red, green, and blue channels corresponding to the first 3 dimensions. Figure 2b projects this color scheme onto one subject's cortex, showing how different brain areas respond to these categories in an intricate distributed pattern across the brain. For example, a green voxel produces a greater bold response to green categories in the semantic space, such as visual and numeric. This suggests that semantic information is represented in intricate patterns that cover the semantic system. Figure 2c shows a flat map of these projections for 3 other subjects, highlighting the remarkable consistency of these semantic patterns across individuals. This consistency could be the result of innate anatomical consistency, or alternatively, the result of common life experiences between subjects. With these dimensions and categories in place, the team then created a semantic atlas of the cortex using the pragmatic model. Figure 3c projects this model onto the cortex of a subject, showing a color-coded map of the semantically selective regions across the brain. I'll point out that several semantic areas identified are also areas involved in the default mode network. This suggests that these semantic areas may represent the same concepts during conscious and unconscious thought, and that voxel-wise models may be capable of decoding thought. This new atlas offers a detailed look at how language and meaning are processed across the brain, and provides a foundation for future research into the neurobiology of language.
Even groundbreaking research comes with its challenges and limitations. First of all, their participants came from quite a narrow demographic. They all came from similar cultures, they were similarly educated, and they were predominantly male, leaving some of the readers to wonder, what would the findings look like for non-Western individuals? What about different countries and people of different ages and educational backgrounds? What about gender? Does that play a role? Then, there's the assumption of functional homogeneity. In other words, their model assumed that each brain area of each participant works as one neat, homogeneous unit, when in reality, our brains are far more complex, with gradients and overlaps that are way harder to map. This is definitely an oversimplified and reductionist approach, especially considering there were only 7 participants in this study. Lastly, how the study focused mainly on passive listening. But think about it. When we listen, do we always listen passively, or do we also engage? This study didn't explore the dynamic changes that come with that. What happens in our brain when we question, respond, or shift our focus. The semantic system and organization in our brains isn't static. It evolves as we think, as we interact and engage with our environments and our peers.
These results are important for many reasons pertaining to the research area of semantic representation. This study helps to advance the understanding of semantic systems by identifying and characterizing the cortical areas involved in semantic processing. It also contributes to the brain's semantic network. It has helped to refine our knowledge of how different types of semantic information, such as social, emotional, temporal, and visual information, are distributed across the brain. It also advances computational approaches to modeling brain activity, for example, through the voxel-wise prediction models. The results contribute to the refinement of functional brain maps, specifically through the pragmatic atlas, which models semantic processing regions. The identification of common semantic dimensions across individuals suggests that while semantic representation can vary between people, there is still substantial shared neural structure. This highlights the possibility of identifying universal principles of semantic organization across humans in the future. This study could also help provide a framework for clinical research, specifically for disorders that impair language or conceptual processing, like aphasia or Alzheimer's disease. The findings of the study could help guide future research into how these disorders affect semantic networks and help discover targeted interventions and diagnostic tools. The study has enhanced both theoretical and practical understanding of semantic processing in the brain, and the results will contribute to future research by offering new tools and insights that can be applied across neuroscience, clinical research, and computational modeling.